people start to almost humanize our technology sometimes and think of it as a machine that solves problems. Consider an old school way of approaching these things where a worker sees a safety hazard. They follow an analog process. If they're engaged, they fill out a card, they drop it in a box. The box gets collected 3 or 4 weeks later. Somebody puts it into a spreadsheet, maybe prioritizes it, maybe a work order gets created to solve this problem. Meanwhile, that worker every day has identified something that they think could hurt them, and they walk by it every day, seeing nothing change and nothing happen. That doesn't motivate them to feel like they're part of something. It doesn't motivate them to help solve these problems. It makes them believe that nobody cares. So when you put a little bit of technology in that worker's hands to help accelerate those mitigations, give them a voice and show them how their voice is being heard and addressed in real time, it's magic. They become involved and engaged and start to solve more and more problems on behalf of the company. We had one customer, when we started with them, they had an analog hazard process, and their average time to close a hazard observation was 42 days. Within 4 months, they were identifying 2 or 3 times as many hazards at this particular site, and their average time to close all of them was 2 days. So, these workers were expressing frustrations that they'd expressed for a long time, but that transparency that the technology gives and the accountability that it creates drives results.
What an energizing kind of safety sweep and transformation that must have.
Yes, I mean a culture change, really a change in the way this stuff is handled, from top-down reactive to bottom up proactive approach. And you can't argue with the results. I mean, when you look at the KPIs that people use around some of these things, there's fundamental change. BEworks has done work in safety before. How do you see the link between some of the work that we've done and previous work that you've done, the science of behavioral psychology and safety? I mean, what's your point of view?
Well, I think I can build on something that you had already illustrated, which is that we have, as humans, as leaders, we're guilty of committing a thing called the fundamental attribution error. We assume that it's so-and-so's fault. It's that guy's fault. He made a mistake. And we don't recognize the systemic precursors to those errors. This fundamental attribution error has a really, I think, neat way to describe it, or to illustrate it, which is, imagine that you're driving down the road and someone cuts you off. And sometimes our first impulse is just to assume that the guy's a real jerk. He cut you off, he pulled right in front of your car, and we think something about him, his personality, his character. And we fail to think that maybe his mirror just angled it a certain way and he didn't see us, or he's in a certain headspace, or there's an emergency going on, and he's actually just a really nice guy, but in an unfortunate set of circumstances, where again, there was something, about the way the mirror in his car was set up. And so leaders need to make that shift from thinking that it's the worker is lazy or incompetent, or they're not motivated, or they're not educated, or it's all resting on the individual's shoulders, as opposed to recognizing the systemic factors that serve as barriers to the behavior change that we want to see. And so that, I think, is one of the philosophical aspects of the drive behavioral economics, is that we need to recognize what's called the choice architecture of our environment. And we need to recognize the role that these biases, like this fundamental attribution bias, fancy word to deal, or fancy kind of concept to deal with this misrecognition of the balance between, individual agency and then the systemic factors that inhibit our success.